taken from her mother and rushed to intensive care.
Anti-government protests have erupted again in Lebanon as the country's currency free falls. Thousands, you can see, took to the streets for largely peaceful demonstrations. They are angry over the lira losing a whopping 70% of its value. That's a local currency since October 2019. As you said, they're protesters. Protesters cheered as fires were set in front of the central bank in Tripoli, while burning barricades forced road closures in and out of the major cities. The government is being blamed for not doing enough, meanwhile, but the Lebanese president now says the central bank will start pumping US dollars into the market. CNN correspondent Jumana Karash has covered the region extensively for us. She joins me now live. And Jumana, we have been here before. So what has changed?
Well, if you look at the situation, Isa, on the ground for the Lebanese people, it has gotten worse. Life has become unbearable for most Lebanese. And this is why you've had these protests that have been taking place on and off since that popular uprising back in October. And what is different about these protests that we saw on Thursday is how widespread they are. You've seen these protests taking place in the capital, in Beirut, in the north, in Tripoli, to the south, in cities like Sidon. And at times this turned into rioting. And what is also interesting, Isa, is how diverse the crowd is. You know, you've seen some of the Shia working class supporters of Hezbollah who have taken part in these protests. This is very rare. This is something we haven't seen in a long time. Protests taking place in Hezbollah strongholds in the capital, Beirut. Perhaps an indication here that Hezbollah is really not objecting to these protests going ahead, not stopping its supporters from taking part in these protests. An indication really of how dire the situation is on the ground. This realization of how angry the population is right now. Because if you look at the figures, Isa, we're talking about the Lebanese lira taking this nosedive in recent days. It has lost about 70% of its value since October. But what does this mean? This means that the Lebanese population in a country that depends on importing a lot of its goods, people have struggled to afford basic goods. The prices of some of the most basic necessities have skyrocketed. With this inflation, people are unable to pretty much feed their children. And we have seen over the past few weeks, talking to these protesters, people tell you they are now facing starvation. According to the World Bank, the poverty level in Lebanon for this year is about 50%. And who do these people blame? The population blames years of economic mismanagement, entrenched corruption. Their ruling elite, these politicians, governments that have come and gone and have not delivered, have not changed the situation. And we are right now at this situation where the anger is rising on the streets. People want to see change. And then you have the politicians, as you mentioned, the Lebanese presidency, President Michel Aoun, in the past hour or so, announcing these new measures coming out after these emergency meetings, saying that everyone, basically, the government, the central bank, the banking sector, will all take responsibility for this current financial crisis, for this mess the country is in. And they say as of Monday, they're going to start pumping dollars into the market to try and stop the lira from from sliding further. So it does seem, if you look at this announcement, Isa, that this is pretty much something that's too little, too late, something of a temporary fix in the face of this anger that is mounting on the streets.
And I imagine, Jumana, as we've seen these protests before, because exactly the same root of it, which is the economy, that it's gone from anger for a lot of people to desperation. Because I imagine COVID, the coronavirus pandemic, has driven the economic situation, made it even worse for so many people.
Absolutely, and we have heard this from people on the streets. You know, you have people who have depended on, their laborers who depend on working day to day to get wages to feed their families. So you had Lebanon with a very strict lockdown where you had a lot of businesses that were shuttered, people lost work, and that had a huge impact on a lot of the population. You know, we heard from the Lebanese government that they expect, as a result of the financial crisis, the economic crisis exacerbated by the COVID lockdown, that this year they expect that 70% of their population is going to be in need of aid. So, I mean, you look at it, it's such a very complex situation. Issa, it's very hard to see how they're going to get out of this. We know that the government has been in talks with the IMF to try and get some sort of a bailout agreement, but this is still in the very early stages. And you look at those scenes on the streets, people just fed up with this situation, facing hunger and starvation now.
Jemana Karacha there for us. Thank you very much, Jemana. I know you'll keep on top of that.
I want to weigh in on this real quick. First of all, I don't have to keep reminding you, I don't guess, that this is all part of biblical Bible prophecy. That nation will rise against nation, country against country, and that there will be wars and commotions all over the world. Basically, what we're seeing is the failure of a corrupt department in a government that has overshadowed its own people, similar towards what has went on here in the United States in regards to our police department. And now the people are waking up to this injustice, this travesty that has happened to them. And if they're waiting on the Saudis to bail them out, good luck in that. I ain't never spoke of this, and I guess in a way maybe I shouldn't even speak of this, but I'm going to go ahead and speak of this anyway. My first wife, which is the mother to my only firstborn, she wound up marrying an individual that got killed on a motorcycle wreck not shortly after that they tied the knot. But then she hooked up with another individual that was from the same race, that's basically the president of the Pakistani banking system over in Pakistan. I may have Afghanistan and Pakistan mixed up, but either or, he's the president of a major superpower over in the Middle East. They handle financial funds every day in exchanging American currency for their currency and other types of currencies. Regardless of how well orchestrated an individual may be in crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, to have an oversight in fact checking everything on not only the financial side but also on the social side is almost next to impossible for one individual to handle. Why this particular individual has a great deal of interest in these departments, I'm sure it's got to do with some of his ancestry pertaining to oil, pertaining to investments. The bottom line is this: whenever the banks that supply the officials are stained and corrupt, it trickles down to the point that the people themselves suffer immensely, either in starvation or not being able to profit off of fair gain that they should be able to profit off of. My son, which helps to operate one of the biggest concrete pumping trucks in the world, right here in the United States, Brundage and Bone, can tell you more about the statistics in how these alignments line up either for the benefit of the people or for the benefit of these corrupt individuals that are trying to maintain their financial structure in these institutions. I am not smart enough to figure out all the pros and cons in what they do and how they do it. But it's obvious that whenever you're having this much difficult in a country or countries that are escalating into starvation, that is now escalating into major rioting, you not only have problems here in the United States pertaining to corruption, but it's obvious you've got corruption over there too as well. On the other perspective, pertaining to communism, pertaining to one of the wealthiest countries supposedly in the world, which was Venezuela, how can you take a country like Venezuela that was one of the wealthiest countries in the world that is now one of the poorest in starving its own people? I'm going to tell you how. The word is very apparent. It's called corruption and greed. And whenever you have these type of departments working in various governments to the point that their own people are now suffering immensely because of one thing or the other, then you're going to have an uprising. Similar towards what's going on not only in Russia but also in China. Because whenever the people realizes that the government only picks and chooses a 1%, a few, that has the opportunity towards basically becoming wealthy or rich based around their entrepreneurialism, that's whenever you have once more a stagnant, corrupt entity inside a society, a secret society that thinks that they're the only ones that is capable and that they're the only ones that is basically required to make wealth off of other people's labors. We want to think that in today's society that slavery has been abolished. A form or a type of slavery has been abolished to a certain degree. The original slavery, as far as enslaving people in behind closed doors and keeping them chained and locked, is still alive and well to this day. But the new type of slavery, the new type of bondage, is now handled basically through groups of people, through politicians or attorneys, that through the sources of paper and pen thinks that they can hold a society down and keeping them under bondage to the point of starving them completely out from civilization. What we're seeing of the uprisings of these people, not only in Portland, Oregon, not only in Minnesota, not only in the United States, not only in Russia, not only in Canada, not only in Canada, I think they're pretty well happy in what they got, but in China and in Venezuela and in other communist-controlled countries, what we're seeing is the uprising of people coming up and saying, hey, we got a right to the piece of the pie too. Even though the piece of the pie has gotten a whole lot thinner, but the reason why that it's gotten a whole lot thinner was because of the oligarchs, the crooks, that kept chunking and chunking and chunking at the pie, to the point that now there's not much left of the pie. So what they're going to have to do is recreate a brand new pie. They're going to have to create a brand new system, regardless whether it be the American system, the China system, or the Venezuela system. They're going to have to emerge into a brand new worldly system, to the point that people do not feel like that they're getting the short end of the stick, to the point that they cannot make ends meet. That's exactly what's going to have to happen, regardless whether it's happening in Iran, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, other parts of the Middle East, or other parts of the planet, all over the planet. That's how I foresee what is going to have to damper down all this protesting and all this looting and rioting, to be able to settle things down for society. Once more, as we preach and teach here at 291 Thompson Road, here at the Windmill Ministries Missions, good luck to all of us in these engagements towards future events to come.
Story, and you are watching Connect the World. We'll be back after a very quick break. Do stay right here. We'll see you.
Estimate as many as 7 million Colombians could fall back below the poverty line by the end of the year, a level not seen since 2002. Fabian Marroquin also took part in the protests last year when he was working as a cook. Now unemployed, his home near Lillebælt also demolished, he thinks a return to the streets is the only way for things to change for the better.
The government slogan is stay at home. But where should I stay if they took away my home?
The Colombian government has so far pledged $74 million to prevent layoffs, but little of those resources are designed to help the informal economy. Colombia is now lifting some quarantine measures while still trying to control the virus. It's a thin line between the health crisis and the economic collapse. Stefano Pozzebon, CNN, Bogota.
So how will future generations remember the coronavirus pandemic, and what will it teach them? Cyril Vanier tells us how museums around the world are finding ways to document life during the COVID crisis.
Once bustling city streets, sitting deserted. A conversation between generations forced to stay apart. Grocery shopping dressed in a makeshift hazmat. A healthcare worker clearly exhausted on the front lines. These are some of the images that capture a pivotal time in history, as museums and cultural institutions around the globe work to document the coronavirus pandemic.
It's really important that for future generations, they're able to look back and see what had to happen in order for us all to be safe. And I also think it's a useful way of processing some of the really difficult feelings and frustrations that we all experience.
In late April, historic England asked people for photos of life on lockdown in their first call for public submissions since World War II. In 1 week, they received nearly 3,000 entries from around the country, illustrating a diverse collective experience.
We've seen a lot of rainbows. That's become a real symbol in the UK of a kind of solidarity within this time. We've seen a lot of examples of people coming out to clap for carers. We've had some really lovely images of people communicating to their elderly relatives. And really pleasingly, we've seen a real example of the kind of British sense of humour. One couple recreated the John Lennon and Yoko Ono bed-in, but it has stay home messages behind it. And so it's really good to see that even in the face of this adversity, people are still keeping their sense of humour.
Elsewhere, curators focus not only on visual display, but physical objects iconic of an unprecedented time.
Certainly a recurring object is face masks. They have become the most powerful visual symbol of the crisis. Also, they've become a political statement as well. Whether you decide to wear one or not can signal how you feel about the government's efforts to reopen. And another category that is growing is objects that are made by businesses who have pivoted their production in order to serve need during the crisis.
The New York Historical Society launched their coronavirus collection in March, starting with a single bottle of hand sanitizer. Their focus is physical artifacts of the pandemic, evidence defining a painful time that may become instructive in the future.
Look at how we are going back to the flu pandemic of 1918 for lessons learned from that experience. We look at the public health measures that were taken and the government interventions that were taken or not taken for guidance on what might be the right thing to do now.
Signage offering gloves to those who can't afford it. A playground cordoned off to keep children from gathering. Computer screens used to socialize in the age of social distancing. These are the items and images that will tell the story of our unprecedented time, shaping how the world remembers the coronavirus pandemic. Cyril Vanier, CNN.
And CNN and Sesame Street are teaming up again to host a special coronavirus town hall. The ABCs of COVID-19, a CNN Sesame Street town hall for kids as well as parents, will air Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. if you are watching here in London. And there's much more ahead on the next hour of Connect World. I'm Lisa Suarez. Do join me in the next few minutes. See you in a minute.
Once more, good luck to all of us. Shalom.